I found a study and I wanted to share it with you, YouTube, because it's a study that shows that I'm on the money. Okay, so the executive summary of this, and I want you to see this. The study results demonstrate that children, students in public Montessori classrooms across the state are faring well as compared to similar non-Montessori public school students when examining academic, behavioral, and affective outcomes. And this was a study that was done on, the South Carolina schools, basically that use the Montessori schools, which are showing an advantage where these do a better job of educating their uh, students than schools, that don't use the Montessori method. This is showing an advantage, to Montessori methods, showing that this is a more effective pedagogy than other pedagogies. And that is not particularly surprising because if you know, you know, and everything, and it's almost insulting that anybody would be surprised by it, because of course it's this way. Anybody that's a free thinking rationalist should be able to come to the fact that, of course, a Montessori method is more, despite the fact that it might scare some parents, God only knows why, maybe they should just go and investigate it. The fact of the matter is that, Montessori's method, how should I put this? In essence, Maria was one of the first doctors in Italy, right? One of the things that we already know about doctors is that they're scientists, So there's a lot of experimenting, being done by doctors. They go and they test things and they test theories and then they test hypotheses. Sorry, you got to get past this use of the common vernacular. Anyways, but they test hypothesis and everything and check and see if they're right and accurate and everything. And the is hypothesis even a word? Anyways, but they test their hypothesis. So, anyways, for diagnostic stuff, they do experiments to see if their, guesses at things happen to be right. And sometimes they have a hunch that is on the money because they've got experience. They get experience at treating people, and once you get experience at treating people, eventually you start to develop an intuition for what might be wrong with them. That's just the way of it. Anyways, so yeah. So, anyways, to get to the point, though, about all this, Maria is a doctor, so, of course, being scientifically literate herself and being educated into the scientific method, Maria's pedagogy is the only one that is based on the scientific method. So, of course, it gets better results than people in other systems. The problem with it is that one of the problems that has existed with this particular methodology is that, quite simply, the problem with it is that there just aren't enough fucking Montessori schools in the United States. So researchers haven't been particularly apt to engage in doing research on them, especially as compared to traditional schools. But Jeff Bezos, the founders of Google, are among the alumni. A bunch of famous people in our creative elite class went to Montessori schools as kids. So you can look up videos from Montessori alumni on YouTube. You can look at, all kinds of things about this. You can look at the fact that Jeff Bezos is donating to these schools so aggressively and everything because he pays a huge amount of credit for his own achievement in this world to the schools that his parents sent him to when he was a kid. He's grateful for where he grew up and what schools that he grew up in. You don't get that kind of, fanaticism usually with schools. A lot of kids resent the schools that they went to, They grow up into bitter, angry adults that hate the school that they went to, and everything in the public school systems. And, so I wanted to get that out there and across and to point out that there is a study showing that the advantage is with Montessori schools and everything, and that the authors of the paper are saying, of course, there is more need for research into this, but unfortunately, there's been a dearth of research in this. That sucks, but what the results that we have so far are encouraging, and what I think is that given the results, which speak for themselves in all of this, that if we really, really do truly care, especially if we care about the students in particular that are at the most risk and the most danger of falling behind and being left behind by the system, and the most vulnerable, like black kids and that sort of thing, then, we cannot, posture, at least in an authentic manner, towards pretending about those people if we are not doing everything we can to convert the system from, a Prussian education system over to, a school that uses the Montessori method. As far as I am concerned, the Montessori, all the other pedagogies that compete against it are inferior for the simple reason that they are not scientifically inspired. They do not use the scientific method. The Montessori method is the only pedagogy that actually happens to use the scientific method. All the other ones do not. So, if you're on Team Science, then you're on Team Montessori. You should be. And any sanctimonious douchebag that pretends to care about these issues and yet isn't advocating that we convert the public schools to Montessori schools is behaving pretentiously at the end of the day. Don't fall for it. So, yes, that is my thinking. Anyways, when I hear out of a mouth of the teacher, where the sentence begins with research has shown, wherever that happens to lead, it's like, oh my god, it's here. Yes, queen, this is what we need. Actually, aligning curriculum with research. Best practices from research. I mean, that is exactly what we should be doing. So, anyways, I did express horror at the Waldorf situation too. I said, I watched the anime '86, and I wouldn't be experiencing the frustration of waiting for them to adapt the real season, rather than just go to part two from season one. So I wouldn't have picked up reading the light novels. And I mean, the internet has made me a bigger reader, somebody more likely to read rather than less. To do something that really usually doesn't involve technology. You don't need tech to read a book. But anyways, if we pretend to care about results, then we should be converting traditional schools to Montessori schools at scale. It shouldn't be happening, at just one or two schools. It should be happening at schools all up and down the country, massive wave of Montessorization, as I put it. Big, bold, Montessori-inspired radical change. You could say it's revolutionary. Because the approach most performers are taking is currently more like trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. And here I am to come to agitate for educational change, but what I'm saying is switch public schools to Montessori schools, convert them, and that's not a little change, it's not tinkering at the edges, it's a bold, sweeping, massive change. I don't believe anything short of something truly far-reaching could fix the U.S. education system, and this is radical enough. This is sufficient to turn it into a Montessori one. That's why I call myself a revolutionary. The scale of change I'm calling for is much larger than most performers. And so I call it revolution even though it's reform. Because it is, even if it isn't a revolution, it's revolutionary in character. We need to do something big to fix education. We're not going to fix the Prussian system and make it a more functional system. You want to truly fix education. You truly care about the kids being educated. You truly care about the question of, is our children learning, as Bush put it. I cringe at that phrase. But, the question is basically, are our children receiving the most effective education possible? if we pretend to care about results, we would not be doing this. If we actually care about results, this is what we should do. We should be publicly financing Montessori schools. When I started using coded language too, because I'm creative and I'm able to engage in creative use of language, so I started talking about evidence-based education as well. The thing about the Montessori method that made it so striking is that it's one of the only pedagogies that I see as being evidence-based. The other ones, just kind of ran with the flow of what they thought and believed. They were not research informed. And I found myself increasingly frustrated at classrooms that were not aligned with the research that was coming out, and the frustrations that I felt in that regard. The science of learning was not having any real impact on how classroom instruction happened to be taught, and it was making me very upset. So, yeah. Anyways, that is my advocacy for the system and everything. And I have a study that you can look at and consume yourself, and I've put it and saved it in my now research notes and everything, so that I have easy access to it for future reference if this ever comes up again. This is a paper. It's showing that the Montessori method is more effective at educating the youth than other schools.